An ambitious woman enters a mansion determined to claim everything, including the heir's heart. What seemed like a simple family visit turns into a cruel psychological game against the elderly mother. But a loyal housekeeper witnesses every manipulation and decides to act before it's too late. The autumn sun cast golden shadows on the gardens of the Oliver Mansion, an imposing estate in the heart of the Upper East Side, a prestigious neighborhood in New York City. Teresa, a 68-year-old lady with elegantly styled gray hair, adjusted the flower arrangements on the coffee table, while Constance, her faithful housekeeper for over 15 years, finished organizing the living room for the arrival of Edward. "Teresa's only son. Do you think you'll like her?" Constance asked, polishing the silver cutlery that had belonged to the family for generations. Teresa smiled, her brown eyes revealing a mix of expectation and apprehension. "If she makes my son happy, I will be happy too, Constance." The sound of tires on the garden gravel announced the arrival of the anticipated couple. Edward Oliver, 45, heir and current president of the Oliver Group, one of the largest construction conglomerates in the United States, parked his Range Rover at the main entrance. Beside him, a stunningly beautiful woman observed the mansion with calculating eyes that disguised themselves as feigned awe. "Is this where you grew up?" asked Vanessa Miller, 35, smoothing the designer dress she had chosen especially for the occasion. "Yes, every corner of this house holds a memory," Edward smiled, proud. "My mother has kept everything exactly as it was when my father was alive." Vanessa forced a smile as she surveyed the property. Her eyes reflected not admiration, but calculation. A mansion of almost 1,000 square meters, in one of the most expensive square meters of New York City, was worth every second of the charade she was about to perform. "I'm looking forward to meeting Teresa," she said with rehearsed sweetness. As they entered, Teresa came to meet her son, embracing him with the maternal affection she always showed. Edward had been her world since she was widowed 12 years ago. When she turned to Vanessa, she tried to see in her what had so enchanted her son in just 6 months of their relationship. "So you're Vanessa. Edward talks about you so much. Welcome to our home," Teresa said, extending her hands. Vanessa held them with calculated delicacy, kissing the lady's cheek with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The pleasure is all mine, Teresa. Edward has told me so many wonderful stories about you." Constance observed the scene from the kitchen door, her experienced eyes catching something she couldn't quite define. There was something in the way Vanessa looked at the house, at the valuables, something almost predatory. During the lunch carefully prepared by Constance, Vanessa spared no praise for the food, the decor, the stories Edward told about his childhood. But when the businessman left to take an urgent call, Vanessa's demeanor subtly changed. "Don't you feel lonely in this big house?" she asked with feigned concern, watching Teresa put sugar in her coffee. "Oh no, I have Constance with me, and Edward comes to visit whenever he can." "Isn't 2 spoonfuls of sugar in your coffee bad for your age?" Vanessa continued in a seemingly innocent tone. Teresa blinked, confused. "I've always had my coffee this way. Of course, I'm sorry. It's just that my grandmother also loved sweets, until the doctor completely forbade them because of the dementia she started to develop. Sugar is terrible for the brain, you know, especially in old age." The comment, dropped casually, planted the first seed of doubt in Teresa's heart. Vanessa smiled inwardly as she watched the lady discreetly push her cup away. When Edward returned, Vanessa was showing photos of her supposed work as a digital marketing consultant, a carefully constructed lie to impress the businessman. In reality, her specialty was another, identifying wealthy men with elderly mothers and infiltrating their lives until she could completely isolate the matriarch. "Vanessa's work is incredible. Mom, she's even helping me with the company's market repositioning," Edward commented, looking with admiration at the woman he believed he loved. That night, when the couple retired to Edward's old room, now transformed into a guest suite, Constance found Teresa in the library, staring into space. "Is something wrong, Teresa?" the housekeeper asked. "I don't know, Constance. I think I really am getting old," Teresa sighed. "Vanessa made me realize that perhaps I'm being a burden to Edward." Constance frowned. "A burden? You could never be a burden to your son." But she's right. He could live here with her, start a family, And I'm taking up space. This girl has been here for less than a day and she's already putting ideas in your head. Constance sat beside Teresa. Edward loves you. This house is as much yours as it is his. Teresa smiled faintly. You're right. I'm being silly. But the poison was already beginning to spread, exactly as Vanessa had planned. The next morning, during breakfast, Vanessa accidentally dropped a catalogue of luxurious senior living residences near Teresa. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, picking up the material. I'm just doing some research for an aunt who needs special care. Edward, engrossed in his phone, didn't notice the lingering glance Vanessa cast at his mother, a look that clearly said, soon your place will be there. Not here. Teresa felt a chill run down her spine, but she smiled politely. At that moment, Constance entered with a tray of fresh fruit and caught the end of that interaction. Something in her experienced woman's heart triggered an alarm. There was something very wrong with Vanessa Miller, and Constance was determined to find out what it was. I'll stay here a few more days. Mom, I want you and Vanessa to get to know each other better, Edward announced. What should have been happy news sounded like a sentence to Teresa, who now wondered if she could endure that woman's presence much longer without her intuition screaming even louder. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. 3 days had passed since Vanessa's arrival at the Oliver mansion. Every time Edward was absent to deal with work matters, Vanessa's true face revealed itself a little more to Teresa. These were subtle comments, seemingly innocent questions, but laden with cruel insinuations. That Wednesday afternoon, while Edward was on a video conference call in his upstairs office, Vanessa found Teresa in the winter garden, tending to her orchids, a passion she had cultivated for decades. They're beautiful, Vanessa commented, approaching silently from behind the lady. It's a shame there's so much work. Wouldn't it be easier to hire a gardener? Or better yet, sell all this? At your age, you should be resting, not worrying about plants. Teresa felt the weight of those words like small pricks. Taking care of my orchids isn't work, it's a pleasure, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Vanessa picked up a pot containing a delicate white phalaenopsis, Teresa's favorite. This one looks a bit wilted. Did you forget to water it? Or perhaps you overwatered it? Her tone was one of feigned concern. These little forgetful moments happen with age, don't they? I never forget to take care of my orchids, Teresa replied, more firmly this time extending her hands to retrieve the pot. Of course, Vanessa returned the plant, not without first casting a look of doubt. You know, my grandmother used to say that too, until the day she left the stove on and almost set the house on fire. That's when we realized she needed constant supervision. Teresa froze, the pot trembling slightly in her hands. I would never do something like that. Everyone says that until it happens, Vanessa shrugged, smiling. That's why those residences I mentioned are so important. Trained professionals, 24-hour medical care. Edward and I could visit you any time. On the other side of the winter garden, Constance observed the scene, intending to ask if the ladies would like some tea. Upon hearing the conversation, she remained still, hidden behind a plant stand. Her heart pounded with indignation. The manipulation was as clear to her as crystal water. Later in the kitchen, Constance was preparing dinner when Teresa entered, visibly dejected. Teresa, are you all right? The housekeeper asked, dropping the knife with which she was cutting vegetables. Oh, Constance. Teresa sat on one of the high stools at the kitchen island. Do you think I'm losing my memory? You? No way. Why do you ask? Vanessa commented that she noticed some forgetfulness on my part. Small things, but they could indicate a bigger problem. What forgetfulness? Constance crossed her arms, suspicious. According to her, yesterday I repeated the same story twice during dinner, and this morning she said she saw me looking for my glasses when they were on my head. Constance frowned. Teresa, I was present throughout yesterday's dinner, and I can guarantee that you didn't repeat any story. And as for the glasses, she pointed to Teresa's face, you never wear glasses on your head. You always keep them in their case when you're not reading. Teresa blinked, confused, but she seemed so certain. This young woman is putting ideas into your head, Constance stated, holding her employer's hands. Why, I don't know yet, but I will find out. That night during dinner, Vanessa performed another act of her play. When Teresa mentioned a trip she had taken with Edward to the Hamptons years ago, Vanessa gently interrupted. Darling, you already told us that story last night, remember? She looked at Edward with theatrical concern. It's the third time this week. Edward looked at his mother with a hint of concern. Is that right, Mom? Teresa hesitated, her confidence in her own memory suddenly shaken. I thought it was a different story. Don't worry, it happens. Vanessa extended her hand, covering Teresa's with false compassion. My grandmother started that way too. After dinner, Edward received an urgent call and had to retreat to his office. Vanessa took the opportunity to intensify her psychological game. Teresa, she said, dropping the respectful Mrs. she used in Edward's presence. We need to talk about your son. Teresa felt a chill down her spine. What about Edward? He's worried about you, but he's afraid to admit it. Last night after you retired, he told me he's been noticing changes in your behavior. Forgetfulness, confusion. Edward said that? Teresa's heart sank. He's thinking about your well-being. He thinks you might need more specialized care. Vanessa took out some brochures for luxurious senior living residences from her bag. He asked me to show you these options, but he was afraid of how you'd react. Teresa's hands trembled as she took the brochures. My son wants to institutionalize me. Institutionalize is such an ugly word. Vanessa smiled with false sweetness. Think of it as an exclusive resort, with people your age and doctors available. It would be a relief for Edward, who could finally live without worrying all the time. A tear rolled down Teresa's wrinkled face. Vanessa observed with perverse satisfaction how her plan was progressing perfectly. The elderly woman already doubted herself and would soon begin to doubt her own son's love. Once she was completely vulnerable, convincing Edward to move his mother to a residence would only be a matter of time. What Vanessa didn't know was that Constance was in the hallway, listening to every word of that cruel conversation. The housekeeper squeezed a dish towel between her fingers, containing the anger she felt. She had served the Oliver family for 15 years, had watched Edward grow up, had been by Teresa's side when her husband passed away. That house was also her home, and no one, especially a con artist like Vanessa, was going to destroy the family she loved. The next morning, Constance found Teresa sitting on the veranda, looking at the garden with empty eyes. I'll bring your coffee, Teresa, she said gently, placing the tray on the table. Thank you, Constance, but I'm not hungry. Teresa's voice sounded defeated. I need to tell you something important. Constance sat beside her employer, something she rarely did. I overheard your conversation with Vanessa last night. Teresa looked at the housekeeper, surprised. Everything she said is a lie, Constance continued. Edward would never talk about institutionalizing you anywhere. He adores the ground you walk on. How can you be sure, Constance? Because I've known your son for 15 years. And because... Constance hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. Because this Vanessa isn't who she says she is. There's something wrong with her. I feel it in my heart. Teresa sighed, confused and distressed. I don't know what to think anymore. What if I really am losing my memory? What if I'm a burden to Edward? I would never be a burden to him. And as for your memory, Constance smiled confidently, let's do a test. Tell me exactly what was for dinner 3 nights ago. Teresa thought for a moment. Shrimp risotto with asparagus, green salad with walnuts, and that dark chocolate dessert Edward loves. Exactly, Constance exclaimed. Your memory is perfect. It's that woman who's planting doubts in your head. A glimmer of hope appeared in Teresa's eyes, but it soon faded when they heard footsteps. Vanessa approached with a radiant smile, holding more residential catalogues. Vanessa's manipulation intensified in the following weeks. Edward, increasingly embroiled in a company crisis, divided his time between long meetings at the office and video calls from the mansion's home office. His time with his mother was reduced to quick breakfasts and dinners, interrupted by urgent calls. In this vacuum, Vanessa thrived. With almost surgical precision, she continued planting small doubts in Teresa's mind and simultaneously whispering concerns into Edward's ear about his mother's mental health. Darling, I forgot to tell you. Your mother had another episode today, she commented casually one evening, while Edward was reviewing some contracts. I think we should schedule an appointment with a neurologist, just to make sure everything is all right. Edward looked up, concerned. Are you sure? I've never noticed anything like that before. It's just that you're so busy. Vanessa caressed his face with false tenderness. I've been observing small signs for weeks, but I didn't want to worry you. What Edward didn't know was that Vanessa had placed the remote in the refrigerator herself while Teresa was in the bath. One among dozens of small traps she set daily to make Teresa appear confused or forgetful. Constance, however, began to piece together the puzzle. After catching Vanessa hiding Teresa's reading glasses in improbable places, the housekeeper decided it was time to act more directly. One afternoon, when Edward had left to solve company problems and Vanessa had gone to the mall, supposedly to buy a gift for Teresa, but in reality to meet an accomplice, Constance gently knocked on her employer's bedroom door. "Teresa, may I come in?" Teresa was sitting in an armchair by the window, looking melancholically at the garden. In recent weeks she had visibly aged. Her posture, once erect and confident, now seemed bowed under the weight of doubts about her own sanity. Of course, Constance. Her voice was just a murmur. Constance sat on the edge of the bed, facing Teresa. "I need to show you something important." She took a small recorder from her apron pocket. "Last night after you retired, I left this hidden in the living room." Teresa looked with curiosity at the device. Constance pressed the play button and Vanessa's voice filled the room. "Yes, everything is going according to plan," she was saying, likely on the phone. The old woman is almost convinced she's losing her mind. "A few more weeks and she'll ask to be institutionalized herself. Then the path will be clear for us. Edward is even richer than we imagined, and completely manipulable. Once his mother is out of the way, I'll have access to everything." Teresa paled. "My God, how could I have been so blind?" "There's more," Constance said, increasing the volume. "After we get married," Vanessa's voice continued on the recorder, "the hard part will be convincing him to sell this mansion. He has a ridiculous attachment to this place because of his mother's memories. But I'll work on that too. In a year at most we'll have liquidated all the assets and then, well, you know the rest of the plan." Constance stopped the recording. "This woman is dangerous, Teresa. She's trying to destroy your family, to seize everything that your husband and you built." Teresa covered her face with her hands, tears streaming between her fingers. "How are we going to tell Edward? He's so in love. He'll think we're making all this up out of jealousy." "That's why we need more proof," Constance asserted, determined. "We'll continue recording her conversations. And more importantly, you need to regain your confidence. Remember who you are, Teresa Oliver, the woman who helped build an empire alongside her husband, who raised a wonderful son, who managed this house with an iron fist and a generous heart for decades." A spark of determination ignited in Teresa's eyes. "You're right, Constance. I've allowed that viper to make me doubt myself for too long." In the following weeks, Teresa and Constance formed a silent alliance against Vanessa's manipulations. When the con artist hid objects only to find them in improbable places, Teresa already knew what was happening. When Vanessa tried to confuse her about dates or events, Teresa stood firm in her memories. Simultaneously, Constance continued collecting evidence. With an old cell phone she had received from Edward, she secretly recorded Vanessa's incriminating conversations, photographed suspicious documents she found in her purse, and meticulously noted every strange behavior. However, Vanessa was too clever to be easily unmasked. Realizing that Teresa was beginning to resist her manipulations, she decided to intensify her strategy, now directly targeting Edward. "Edward, I'm really worried about your mother," she said one night while they were alone in the office. "Today I found her in the garden talking to herself, as if she were speaking with your father." Edward frowned. "My father?" "Yes, she really seemed to believe he was there." Vanessa bit her lip, feigning concern, and when I tried to gently bring her back to reality, she became very agitated, saying I wanted to steal her jewelry. "My mother would never act like that," Edward replied, though a seed of doubt began to grow in his mind. "Darling, it's hard to accept, I know." Vanessa caressed his face. "But dementia isn't something that happens overnight. They are small signs that accumulate, and the sooner we intervene, the better it will be for her." Edward ran his hand through his hair, worried. "Perhaps we really should consult a specialist." Exactly what Vanessa wanted to hear. "I have the contact of an excellent neurologist. I can schedule an evaluation for next week." She hesitated dramatically. "I just think—" Well, maybe it's better not to mention the appointment to her beforehand. You know how people with cognitive decline can become paranoid about doctors. Not tell my mother. That seems wrong. It's for her own good, darling. If she knows, she'll be anxious for days, which could affect the test results. Besides, she's been so suspicious lately. Just yesterday I heard her telling Constance that someone is messing with her things. Edward sighed. The weight of his company worries now compounded by his anguish over his mother. You really are worried about her, aren't you? Vanessa hugged him, hiding a triumphant smile on his shoulder. Of course I am. Teresa will be my family too, so I only want the best for her. Vanessa's plan was advancing perfectly. The appointment with the neurologist, a charlatan she knew from previous scams, was set. After that, it would only be a matter of time until Teresa was declared incapable of making decisions about her own life. With Edward completely manipulated, Vanessa would have a clear path to take control of everything. What she hadn't counted on was Constance's determination. The housekeeper, realizing she needed to act quickly, decided to confront Edward directly. The next morning, as he had coffee before leaving for the office, Constance approached him. "Mr. Edward, I need to speak with you." "In private." Edward looked at his watch, impatient. "Constance, I'm really late for a meeting. It's about your mother and about Vanessa." The seriousness in Constance's tone made him stop. "Please, sir." 5 minutes, Edward indicated a chair. "What is it?" Constance took a deep breath. "Your mother isn't losing her memory, nor is she getting confused, nor having hallucinations. Vanessa is manipulating both of you." "What? What nonsense is this?" "I know it sounds crazy, but I have proof." Constance took her cell phone from her pocket. "Listen to this." Before she could show the recordings, however, Vanessa entered the kitchen. "Good morning. What are you two talking about so seriously?" Her tone was light, but her eyes fixed furiously on Constance. "Nothing important," Constance replied quickly, putting her phone away. "Just a few details about tonight's dinner." Edward looked suspiciously at the housekeeper, but the insistent ring of his cell phone distracted him. "I need to answer that." "It's the CFO. We'll talk later, Constance." When Edward left, Vanessa slowly approached Constance, her face transforming into a mask of hatred. "What do you think you're doing, you meddler?" Constance stood firm against Vanessa's menacing gaze. "I'm protecting my family," she replied simply. "Family?" Vanessa laughed disdainfully. "You're just a maid, disposable like any other appliance in this house. I've been with Teresa for 15 years. I watched Edward grow up. I held her hand when Anthony passed away. That is family." Constance crossed her arms. "And you won't destroy it." Vanessa's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you threatening me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A con artist. And I have proof." Vanessa took a step forward, intimidating. "If you dare show anything to Edward, I guarantee it will be the last thing you do in this house. I have him in the palm of my hand. Who do you think he'll believe? The girlfriend he loves or the resentful maid? He knows my character." "I know people like you," Vanessa continued, venom in every word. "You must be jealous of me. Perhaps you even harbored fantasies about your little boss all these years." Constance flushed with indignation. "Your sick mind can only see ulterior motives in others, because that's how you operate." Vanessa smiled cruelly. "Listen carefully. I'm going to be the next lady of this house. Teresa will soon be in a luxury residence, drooling while watching television all day, and you'll be fired the moment I put a ring on my finger." "We'll see," Constance replied, maintaining her composure despite the anger she felt. "It's not over yet." "For you, it's over." Vanessa turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "By the way, I've already started suggesting to Edward that you're encouraging his mother's delusions. I suggested that perhaps we need a younger housekeeper, one who won't keep feeding the confused conversations of a senile old woman." When Vanessa left, Constance felt the weight of that threat. She needed to act fast. More than ever, she was determined to protect Teresa and unmask that viper before it was too late. That same afternoon, while Teresa was resting in her room, Constance received an unexpected visit. Julia Adams, an old colleague who worked as a housekeeper in another mansion in the same neighborhood, appeared at the back door with a grave expression. "Constance, we need to talk," she said, after being invited into the kitchen. "It's about your employer's girlfriend." "Vanessa? What about her?" Julia looked around, making sure they were alone. Her name isn't Vanessa. Her name is Vera Matos, and she did the same thing at the house where my cousin works 2 years ago. Constance sat down, stunned. What do you mean? Same story. Young, beautiful woman, seduces a rich businessman with an elderly mother, starts manipulating everyone, makes the lady seem confused, tries to convince the son to institutionalize her. What happened there? Julia lowered her eyes. The lady ended up being institutionalized. She became so depressed that she stopped eating. She didn't make it. The son sold the mansion 3 months later and married. Vanessa or Vera, or whatever her real name is, a month after the wedding, he suffered a mysterious accident at home. He fell down the stairs. He's been in a coma ever since. Constance covered her mouth with her hands. My God. She disappeared with the money and vanished. My cousin only recognized her now because she saw a photo of her with your employer in a society magazine. We need to warn him before it's too late. Constance nodded, determined. I already have some proof. Recordings where she reveals her plans. But Edward is so blinded by passion that I'm afraid he won't believe it. We need something more concrete, Julia said. Something he can't ignore. The two women spent the next hour devising a plan. Julia promised to get photos and documents from the previous case, while Constance committed to continuing to collect evidence of the current manipulation. The next morning, during breakfast, Vanessa executed her boldest move yet. While Edward was consulting his tablet, she casually commented, Darling, I forgot to tell you. Yesterday your mother had another episode. Edward looked up, concerned. What episode? I know, see, she came into our room looking for your father. When I gently explained that he wasn't here, she became aggressive, saying I was hiding something. Teresa, who had just entered the room, stopped abruptly. That's a lie. I didn't do any of that. Vanessa feigned surprise and cast a meaningful glance at Edward, as if to say, see. Teresa, dear, don't worry. We all understand that you don't control these moments. What moments? You're making all this up. Teresa trembled with indignation. Edward stood up, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, please, let's keep calm. Don't treat me like a child. Teresa pulled away, hurt. Ask Constance. She knows everything. At that moment, Constance entered the room, drawn by the altered tone of the voices. She quickly assessed the situation and knew it was time to intervene. Mr. Edward, your mother is telling the truth. Vanessa stood up, irritated. Constance, don't get involved in this. It's a family matter. And that's exactly why I'm getting involved. Constance walked to her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. I think you need to hear this. Before Vanessa could intervene, Constance pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room. The old woman is almost convinced she's losing her mind. A few more weeks, and she'll ask to be institutionalized herself. Then the path will be clear for us. Edward paled. Vanessa tried to grab the phone, but he stopped her with a firm gesture. What is this, Vanessa? The woman quickly composed an expression of indignation. A setup. They're trying to separate us. Edward, don't you see? Your mother has always hated me, and now she's co-opted the housekeeper to help her defame me. Continue the recording, Constance, Teresa requested, with a firmness she hadn't shown in weeks. Constance obeyed. Vanessa's voice continued. After we get married, the hard part will be convincing him to sell this mansion. He has a ridiculous attachment to this place because of his mother's memories. But I'll work on that too. In a year at most, we'll have liquidated all the assets and then, well, you know the rest of the plan. Edward's face transmuted from shock to anger. Who was on the other end of that call, Vanessa? Edward, this is absurd. They clearly manipulated my voice. Vanessa desperately tried to regain control of the situation. Are you going to believe a dubious recording instead of trusting me? The woman who loves you? It's not just the recording, Constance intervened. We have more proof. Your name isn't Vanessa Miller. It's Vera Matos, and you've done this before. Vanessa recoiled, her mask of innocence beginning to crack. Julia Adams, housekeeper at the Peterson mansion, recognized you, Constance continued. You did exactly the same thing to Lucy Peterson. After she was institutionalized and passed away, you married her son. A month later, he suffered a mysterious accident. He's been in a coma ever since, while you disappeared with the family fortune. Edward looked at Vanessa as if seeing her for the first time. Is this true? Of course not. Vanessa tried to hold his hand, but Edward pulled away. They're making all this up. Julia is probably in love with you. They planned this together. Julia has been married for 20 years, Constance observed. Dryly, Edward, Teresa approached her son. This woman has been trying to make me seem crazy to get rid of me. She wants our fortune, our house, everything your father and I built. And from what Constance discovered, she wouldn't hesitate to hurt you too after getting what she wants. Edward remained silent for a few moments, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The man who had built an empire and led hundreds of employees now seemed lost, like a child discovering that the world was not what it seemed to be. His hands, normally firm when signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he processed everything he had just heard. The living room of the Oliver mansion, usually a haven of elegance and tranquility, was charged with tension. The golden light of the late afternoon streamed through the French windows, creating an almost theatrical illumination for the unfolding drama. Vanessa, or whatever your name is, he finally said, his voice low, contrasting with the emotional storm in his eyes. I want you out of my house. Now. Vanessa realized her facade was rapidly crumbling. In seconds, her expression transformed from feigned innocence to a calculating coldness that Edward had never seen before. It was as if a mask had been torn off, revealing something dark and unrecognizable beneath. You'll regret this, she said, pointing at Teresa. She really is a burden. She'll drain you until the end, and when you realize it, you'll have wasted your life taking care of a useless old woman. The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Teresa recoiled as if she had been physically slapped, but she remained erect, her eyes fixed on Vanessa with a mixture of horror and pity. Enough! Edward's shout echoed through the room, making the chandelier crystals tremble slightly. Never, in all her years in that house, had Constance seen him lose control like that. Not one more word against my mother. Get out of here before I call the police. Vanessa quickly recomposed herself, adjusting her posture like a snake preparing to strike. She smoothed her designer dress and threw her hair back with a studied movement. This isn't over, Edward. You'll still come looking for me, begging for forgiveness when you realize the mistake you've made. A cold smile crossed her lips. And as for you, Teresa, enjoy your temporary victory. People like you always end up alone, abandoned in some asylum when they become too much of a burden. She cast a look of pure hatred at Teresa and Constance before going upstairs to collect her things. The high heels of her expensive shoes echoed on the stairs like furious hammer blows. Edward immediately called the mansion's head of security, who lived in a small dwelling at the back of the property. Augustus Stone, a middle-aged man with the discretion and loyalty his position required, appeared in minutes. Augustus, I want you to escort Vanessa until she leaves the property, Edward instructed, his tone making the seriousness of the situation clear. She is no longer authorized to enter here under any circumstances. Augustus nodded, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation from his employer's expression. Consider it done, sir. I'll personally take care of it. The minutes that followed seemed eternal. Teresa sat on the sofa, her trembling hands resting on her lap. Constance remained by her side, a silent but comforting presence. Edward paced back and forth like a caged animal, occasionally running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. When Vanessa descended with her bags, escorted by Augustus, the air seemed to freeze. She passed Edward without saying a word, but the look she cast at Teresa was pure venom, a silent promise that this was not the end. Her posture, however, betrayed a contained fury, visible in the tension of her shoulders and her clenched jaw. Her knuckles were white from the strength with which she held the strap of her designer handbag. After the door closed, a heavy silence fell over the room, as if no one dared to breathe, fearing that any movement could make the world collapse again. The hands of the old clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion, marking the seconds of that suspended moment between nightmare and relief. "Mom, Edward began, but his voice failed him. Suddenly he seemed to have aged 10 years. The lines around his eyes, which once lent charm to his face, were now furrows of worry. "Forgive me. I should have realized. I should have protected you." Teresa approached her son and held his hands, noticing how cold they were despite the afternoon warmth. "You were deceived, my son. People like her are experts in manipulation. They study their victims, find their vulnerabilities, and strike precisely where it hurts the most. But I allowed her to treat you that way, so it'll make you doubt yourself." Edward lowered his head, ashamed. In his chest, a knot of guilt seemed to stifle every breath. "What kind of son am I?" "The best I could have," Teresa smiled, caressing her son's face as she did when he was little and woke up scared from a nightmare. "The important thing is that now we know the truth." Constance watched the scene with tears in her eyes. The image of mother and son reconciled after weeks of tension and manipulation was more powerful than any comforting words. Finally, peace seemed to have returned to that house. However, a disquiet lingered in her heart. In 15 years of working for wealthy families, she had known people like Vanessa. They didn't give up easily, especially when they had so much to gain. Her suspicions were confirmed the next morning when Edward received a call from his assistant at the company. Constance was serving breakfast in the dining room, where Teresa was trying to regain the appetite she had lost during weeks of stress, when Edward's cell phone rang. By the businessman's expression upon seeing the name on the screen, something important had happened. "What?" Edward's shout echoed through the kitchen, making Teresa drop the spoon she was holding. "Since when? Who else knows about this?" "No, don't do anything until I get there. I'm coming right away." Edward ended the call with unnecessary force, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and concern. "What happened?" Teresa asked, her voice betraying the fear that the newly found calm would be disturbed again. Edward ran his hand through his hair, clearly disturbed. "Vanessa is spreading horrible rumors about us. She told the press that I mistreat you, that I practically keep you under house arrest and refuse to seek medical help for your advanced state of dementia." "But that's absurd," Teresa exclaimed, paling. "How can she invent something so terrible?" "She gave interviews to 2 influential newspapers," Edward continued, his tone now more controlled but no less tense. "She presented herself as a close family source, concerned about your well-being. She said she tried to intervene and that's why I pushed her away." "But it's her word against ours," Constance observed, trying to calm the situation as she placed a cup of chamomile tea in front of Teresa. "It's her word against ours," Edward sighed, "and she's very convincing. It's already affecting the company's business. 2 important investors cancelled meetings today, saying they don't want to associate their image with someone accused of family neglect." Teresa brought her hand to her mouth, horrified. "Because of me, your company—" "No," Edward interrupted firmly, taking his mother's hands in his. "Not because of you, Mom, because of her. Because of her malice. You are not to blame for anything." "What are we going to do?" "I'm going to confront her, clarify everything." Edward stood up, determined. His eyes, so like his father's, shone with the same determination that Anthony Oliver displayed in the face of challenges. "I won't allow her to destroy our reputation either." Edward kissed his mother's forehead and left hastily, leaving Teresa and Constance in the dining room, immersed in a new kind of anxiety. As Teresa contemplated her teacup with distant eyes, Constance began to organize her thoughts. If Vanessa was willing to take her revenge so far, who knew what else she might do? While Edward headed to the company to deal with the crisis, Teresa and Constance remained at the mansion, trying to process the latest events. The television in the living room was tuned to a news channel, which occasionally displayed headlines about accusations of neglect against a renowned businessman. Each time the Oliver name was mentioned, Teresa trembled as if feeling physical pain. "You shouldn't watch that." "Teresa," Constance said, gently taking the remote control and turning off the device, "you'll only torture yourself more." "I'm worried about Edward," Teresa replied, her eyes fixed on the now dark screen. "The company is his life. If he loses everything because of me—" "It wasn't your fault." Constance sat beside Teresa, momentarily breaking the invisible barrier between employer and employee. "And Mr. Edward is intelligent. He will find a way to resolve this." "She seemed so kind at first," Teresa murmured, lost in memories. "How could I not have noticed what was hidden behind that smile?" The day passed tensely. Edward did not return for lunch or dinner. Teresa tried to call several times, but he didn't answer, sending only short messages saying he was in meetings trying to control the damage. Each hour that passed seemed to stretch indefinitely, laden with apprehension. Around 9 in the evening, as Teresa was preparing for bed, the doorbell rang. Constance, who was tidying the kitchen, went to answer it. To her horror, Vanessa stood at the door, impeccable in a black dress that contrasted with the calculated paleness of her face. "What are you doing here?" Constance asked, blocking the entrance. Her body, normally relaxed in performing household tasks, was now tense as a coiled spring. "You are not welcome in this house." "Relax, little maid," Vanessa smiled coldly, her condescending tone making Constance's blood boil. "Edward authorized me to pick up some things I forgot. He's very busy trying to save the company's reputation, thanks to my little outburst to the press." The perverse satisfaction in her voice when mentioning Edward's problems was evident. "I don't believe you." Vanessa rolled her eyes and showed her cell phone, displaying a supposed message from Edward, authorizing her entry. The message seemed authentic, with his photo in the profile and the text written in the concise style he usually used, but Constance remained suspicious. Something in her instinct, the same one that had warned her about Vanessa from the beginning, screamed that something was wrong. "If it's true, why didn't he tell me?" "Times perhaps because you're just the maid and not the lady of the house," Vanessa replied disdainfully, every word laden with scorn. "Look, I'm not in the mood. I'm going in, getting my things and leaving. Don't complicate things more than they already are." Constance hesitated. If the message was truly from Edward, preventing Vanessa from entering could cause more problems. On the other hand, if it was fake, reluctantly she decided to allow entry, but remained vigilant, following her at a safe distance. She noticed how Vanessa moved with familiarity through the house, as if she still considered herself a part of it, her high heels marking each step on the marble floor. Instead of going up to the room where she had stayed, however, Vanessa went directly to Teresa's bedroom. An alarm sounded in Constance's mind. "What do you think you're doing?" Constance questioned, alarmed. "Your things aren't there." "I need to have a little chat with Teresa before I go," Vanessa replied without stopping, her expensive perfume leaving a trail in the air. "We have unfinished business, sir. Teresa is resting. You won't disturb her." Vanessa ignored the warning and opened the bedroom door without knocking. Teresa, who was in bed reading a book of poetry that usually comforted her in difficult times, looked up in surprise. Upon seeing Vanessa, her face, which had finally regained some color, paled again. "What are you doing here?" "I came to say goodbye properly," Vanessa said, her falsely sweet tone contrasting with the dangerous glint in her eyes. "After all, we were almost family." Constance entered right behind, positioning herself protectively close to Teresa. "She says Mr. Edward authorized her entry, Teresa, but I don't believe it." The tension in the room was palpable, like static electricity before a storm. Vanessa approached Teresa's bed, who instinctively recoiled until she touched the carved headboard. "You know, Teresa, you really ruined my plans, but not completely. Your son is out there now, desperately trying to contain the rumors I planted. Rumors that will grow, spread like wildfire. In a matter of days, the Oliver name will be stained forever." "Why are you doing this?" Teresa asked, her voice trembling but surprisingly firm. There was a dignity in her posture that not even fear could completely shake. "Because I can," Vanessa replied simply, shrugging as if discussing something trivial. "And because if I can't have what I want, no one else will." Constance realized the situation was getting out of control. Discreetly, she took out her cell phone and began recording the conversation, keeping the device partially hidden in her apron pocket. "Don't you realize you're just confirming everything we found out about you?" Teresa said, gaining confidence as she spoke. The weeks of doubt about her own sanity seemed to dissipate in the face of concrete evidence of Vanessa's cruelty. "You are exactly the manipulative and cruel person we suspected." "So what?" Words against words. "Who's going to believe the elderly lady, who according to rumors suffers from advanced dementia, or the poor housekeeper desperate to keep her job?" She leaned over Teresa, deliberately invading her personal space. "When I'm done, you'll have nothing. No money, no reputation, no peace." "Enough," Constance intervened, stepping forward. Her body, usually bent from years of domestic work, was now erect, as if an inner strength sustained her. "Get out of this room now, or I'll call the police." "You don't scare me, little maid," Vanessa replied, turning to face Constance. "Do you really think you can stop me?" "No, but I can." Edward's deep, firm voice sounded from the doorway. Everyone turned, surprised. He stood at the entrance, his face marked by fatigue and anger. His tie was loose, his jacket wrinkled after a full day of crisis meetings. But his eyes burned with a determination none of them had ever seen. "Edward!" Vanessa exclaimed, instantly shifting to a victim's expression, her eyes suddenly welling up with tears that seemed to appear on command. "Thank God you're here. Your mother and this woman are accusing me of horrible things." "Enough with the lies," Edward replied coldly. "I heard everything. Every threatening word you directed at my mother." The blood seemed to drain from Vanessa's face, leaving her paler than her natural complexion. "You were listening." "Edward, you don't understand. I was just—" Vanessa desperately tried to regain control of the situation, her calculating brain frantically searching for an escape. "Threatening my mother?" Edward took a step forward, his expression hard as granite. "Destroying our family's reputation? Harming a company that employs hundreds of people? You humiliated me." Vanessa exploded, completely abandoning her facade. Her beauty, always carefully composed, distorted into a mask of hatred. "You threw me out like I was trash, all because of this useless old woman." The insult hung in the air like poison. Edward stiffened, his fists clenching involuntarily. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but every word carried the weight of a hammer. "That useless old woman is my mother, the woman who raised me, who built all this with my father, who taught me values that clearly you never knew." "Values?" Vanessa laughed hysterically, her eyes feverish with rage. "Values don't buy anything, darling. Money does. And I almost had yours in my hands." The confession, so blatant, made Teresa tremble. It was one thing to suspect Vanessa's intentions, another entirely to hear confirmation from her own lips. "Get out of my house," Edward ordered. "Augustus is downstairs waiting to escort you. And don't try anything else against my family. I have all the evidence we need against you, including this conversation we just recorded. One more move and I'll present everything to the police." Vanessa looked around like a cornered animal. For a moment it seemed she would attack Teresa or Constance, her eyes calculating distances and possibilities. But then she retreated, understanding that she was defeated, at least temporarily. "This isn't over," she said finally, adjusting her dress in an automatic gesture of composure. "Nothing ends until I say it ends." When she left, the sound of her heels echoed down the hallway, like the ticking of a time bomb. Something in the final look she cast at Teresa made Constance involuntarily shiver. It was the look of someone who still had cards to play, of someone who knew no limits. A week passed since the final confrontation with Vanessa. The Oliver mansion breathed lighter air, as if a toxic cloud had been dispelled. Teresa gradually regained her confidence, returning to care for her orchids and organize her traditional Sunday lunches with close friends. Color returned to her face, and that posture curved under the weight of insecurity once again gave way to the natural elegance that had always characterized her. The orchids, which had suffered from forced neglect during the dark days of Vanessa's manipulation, now bloomed again under Teresa's attentive care. Each new flower that opened seemed to symbolize her own recovery. Edward, however, still carried the weight of guilt. Although he was managing to contain the damage to the company's reputation, he spent hours in his office, downcast, reliving the moments when he doubted his own mother. The deep dark circles under his eyes revealed sleepless nights. One Saturday morning, while having coffee on the veranda overlooking the garden, Teresa finally addressed the matter. "Son, you need to stop blaming yourself." Edward lifted his eyes from the cup he was staring at without truly seeing. "How can I, Mom? I allowed that woman to mistreat you, to make you doubt yourself." "What kind of son does that?" "A son who was deceived by a person very skilled at manipulating others," Teresa replied, covering Edward's hand with hers. "The important thing is that when you discovered the truth, you acted immediately to protect our family. I should have noticed sooner. All the signs were there." "Edward Oliver," Teresa adopted that maternal tone that, even at 45, still made Edward feel like a boy. "You've spent your whole life protecting me. Ever since your father passed away, you've carried the weight of taking care of me and the company, without ever complaining. It's time to forgive yourself and move forward. Your father would be proud of how you handled all of this." The mention of Anthony Oliver brought a sparkle to Edward's eyes. His father had been his mentor, his example of integrity in business and family life. At that moment, Constance approached with a tray of fresh fruit and homemade bread. "Teresa is right, sir. What matters is the now and the future we're going to build." Edward smiled for the first time in days. "When you two team up against me, I don't stand a chance." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Raphael Carter, the Oliver family's trusted lawyer for over 20 years. Edward had hired Raphael to investigate Vanessa's past and find out if there was any legal way to prevent her from harming other families. "Good morning." "Everyone," Raphael greeted, accepting the cup of coffee Constance offered him. "I bring important news. Did you find out anything about Vanessa?" Edward asked, straightening in his chair. Raphael nodded, opening his folder. "Vanessa Miller is just one of the many names she used. Her real name is Vera Matos, as we suspected. She is 41 years old, not 35 as she claimed, and has an impressive history of similar scams in at least 3 American states." "My God," Teresa murmured. "How many families has she destroyed?" "At least 4 that we managed to track," Raphael continued. "The Peterson case in Boston was the most serious, with the son still in a vegetative state after a suspicious fall. But we also identified cases in Chicago and Miami. The modus operandi is always the same. She approaches wealthy businessmen with elderly mothers, creates conflicts, isolates the matriarch, and then takes control of the assets. And in the other families, the mothers were also..." Teresa couldn't complete the sentence. "In 2 cases, the ladies were admitted to psychiatric clinics under dubious diagnoses of dementia," Raphael replied with regret. "One of them did not resist the deep depression she developed. The other is still institutionalized, although we have already contacted the family." "Do we have enough evidence for legal action?" Edward asked. "Yes, several. In addition to the recordings made by Constance, we found suspicious bank transfers, forged documents, and the testimony of the Peterson family. I have just filed a formal complaint with the district attorney's office." Edward breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Raphael. Your efficiency always impresses me. But there's something else I need to discuss with you," the lawyer continued. "The rumors spread by Vanessa have caused considerable damage to the company's image. Shares fell almost 15% last week. 3 important contracts have been suspended, and international investors threaten to withdraw their contributions. The situation is complicated." Edward sighed. "I figured as much. We're working on a recovery plan, but it will take time." "What if we transform this crisis into an opportunity?" Teresa suggested, surprising everyone. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I've been thinking a lot in the last few days," Teresa continued, her eyes shining. "What Vanessa tried to do to me, making me doubt my sanity, isolating me, making me feel like a burden, probably happens to many elderly people every day, under different circumstances." Edward nodded, beginning to understand what his mother was getting at. "What if we created a senior community center?" Teresa proposed. "A place where people my age could feel valued, protected, part of a community. We could offer activities, medical monitoring, psychological support, everything to promote a dignified and happy old age." "Turning our pain into something positive," Edward observed. "Exactly. We could use part of the land from the disused factory in Brooklyn. The space is enormous and has been unused for years. Imagine, Edward, a place where elderly people can practice gardening, exercise, learn new things, share experiences." Raphael smiled. "From a public relations standpoint, it would be a brilliant move. It would completely transform the narrative created by Vanessa. I don't want to do this just for public relations," Edward clarified. "I want to do it because it's the right thing to do. Because maybe we can help other families not go through what we almost went through." "I could help coordinate the project," Teresa offered. "I have time, administrative experience, and I understand the needs of people my age." "You would be perfect as honorary director," Edward agreed. "And Constance could be your official assistant." Constance's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just..." "Don't say you're just a housekeeper," Edward gently interrupted. "You saved our family, Constance. You have the perfect loyalty, intelligence, and sensitivity for this role." Constance blushed, moved. All her life she had served behind the scenes, always efficient but rarely noticed. The idea of taking on an official role was simultaneously daunting and exciting. In the following months, the Anthony Oliver Community Center project, named in honor of the family's late patriarch, quickly took shape. The old industrial warehouse in Brooklyn was completely renovated. transforming into a welcoming space with green areas, activity rooms, medical offices, and an auditorium for cultural events. Teresa enthusiastically embraced her role as honorary director, implementing innovative programs such as Living Memories, where seniors recorded their life stories, and Generational Bridges, which connected seniors with university students for knowledge exchange. Constance proved to be a natural administrator, managing the staff with firmness and sensitivity. To her surprise, she discovered a talent for identifying emotional vulnerabilities in the elderly and enrolled in a course on psychology for seniors. The center quickly became a model for similar initiatives across the country. 6 months after its inauguration, it was already serving over 200 seniors regularly, and there was a waiting list. The press, which had previously echoed the rumors planted by Vanessa, now highlighted the project as an example of social responsibility. On a significant morning, Teresa received a visit at the center that deeply moved her. Lucy, the lady who had been institutionalized because of Vanessa in Boston. Thanks to Raphael's investigations, her family had finally understood that she had been a victim of manipulation. "I thought I would never be heard again," Lucy said, holding Teresa's hands. "That I would spend my last days convinced I was crazy." "I understand perfectly," Teresa replied, "but now we are here, proving that they were wrong about us." As for Vanessa, or Vera, the investigations resulted in her preventive arrest. To everyone's relief, she was prevented from making new victims. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 1 year after the final confrontation with Vanessa, the Oliver mansion was bustling as it hadn't been in a long time. Teresa had organized a celebration to commemorate the first year's success of the community center. In the exquisitely maintained garden, tables were arranged under the centuries-old trees. Dozens of seniors served by the center mingled with staff, family, friends, and volunteers, creating an atmosphere of genuine joy. Edward, who finally seemed to have regained the lightness Vanessa had almost destroyed, circulated among the guests. The company crisis had been completely overcome. The center project had not only restored the Oliver Group's image, but had also opened new business opportunities. Teresa, elegant in a turquoise blue dress, chatted animatedly with a group of ladies. Beside her, Constance, no longer wearing a housekeeper's uniform, but a sophisticated outfit, smiled with pride. At one point, Edward called for everyone's attention, lightly tapping his glass with a spoon. "First, I want to thank each of you for being present at this very special celebration," he began. "A year ago, our family faced one of the most difficult moments of our lives. We almost lost everything that matters most: our bonds, our trust, our mutual respect." Teresa smiled at her son, her eyes moist. "But as the saying goes, it's in adversity that we discover our true strength," Edward continued. "And we discovered something else, that sometimes you have to almost lose something to truly appreciate its importance." He raised his glass towards his mother. "I want to propose a toast to the most extraordinary woman I know, my mother, Teresa Oliver, the woman who transformed a terrible experience into a project that now brings joy and dignity to hundreds of people." Teresa walked up to her son, moved. "This center exists thanks to you, my son, and thanks to all the wonderful people who believed in our vision." Edward hugged his mother and then motioned for Constance Santos to join them. "Hand a special toast to Constance Santos, who went from housekeeper to heroine and is now officially part of the Oliver Group's board of directors. Without her courage and loyalty, we wouldn't be here today." "And I have a special announcement," Edward continued. "As of today, Constance is also a minority shareholder in the Oliver Group." Enthusiastic applause echoed through the garden. Constance, astonished, looked at Edward, unable to believe what she had just heard. "I promise one thing today," Edward declared. "I will never again allow anyone to try to separate me from my mother or disrespect her years of wisdom. And if one day I find someone to share my life with, it will be someone who understands that loving me includes loving and respecting the woman who raised me." That afternoon, under the golden sun that bathed the garden, a true family celebrated not only the overcoming of a crisis, but the birth of a greater purpose. Teresa, watching her son talk with the seniors, felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Pain had been transformed into purpose, threat into opportunity, fear into determination. In a quiet moment, Teresa found herself alone with Constance near the small garden pond, where colorful koi swam lazily. "I never imagined my life would take this turn at 68, Teresa confessed. "I always thought old age would be a gradual withdrawal from the world, not a rebirth." "Life always surprises us," Constance replied. "Sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better." Teresa held the hand of her now friend and confidant. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I almost gave up on myself. Family is that, isn't it? Being present in difficult times, believing when the other doubts, lifting when the other falls." Teresa nodded, looking at her son, who was now approaching with a radiant smile. "Yes, Constance, family is exactly that." And there in that garden where she had once felt so fragile and insecure, Teresa Oliver realized that true strength wasn't in never falling, but in knowing how to get back up, preferably with the help of those who genuinely care. The woman who was almost convinced of her own incapacity now inspired hundreds of other seniors to rediscover their worth and purpose. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Teresa, Edward, and Constance has deeply touched your hearts. May Constance's courage, Teresa's resilience, and Edward's love inspire us to value true family bonds and protect those we love. To continue experiencing emotions like these, we have a special playlist with other stories that celebrate the strength of family ties. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this narrative about manipulation and redemption awakens something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. Share in the comments if you have witnessed situations of emotional manipulation and how they were overcome. Your experience can help others going through similar situations.